Have you ever been driving in a car, either as a passenger or as a driver, and strayed off the road and been shocked into awareness by the rumble strips? Have you ever been driving and had someone veer into your path? Of course, we all have. Those yellow lines in the middle of the road that separate one path from another carry a lot of power. They help to keep us organized, to keep millions of cars and trucks and vehicles organized. And those rumble strips have the power to wake us up when we run into somebody else's lane. They are an alarm of sorts to bring us to an awareness that we want to pay more attention to our guidance system so that we can stay focused on where we want to go. We can use the idea of the rumble strip for our lives as well. Think about it. We are on our own road. And there are times when we are tempted to stray into somebody else's path. And there are times when we do move into somebody else's path. There are times when somebody else moves into ours. That's part of life. So the question becomes for us not if we're going to stray into somebody's path, but what to do when we hit the rumble strip that wakes us up to the awareness that we've done so, that we have moved out of our own journey and into somebody else's, or when somebody else has moved into our journey instead of allowing us to do so ourselves. The reason I say that it's not a matter of if, but when, is because we are human. And if you don't believe that this has been going on for millennia for us humans, where we always have this tendency to want to be in somebody else's business, let me draw your attention to the very second chapter of the very first book of the Bible, Genesis, where Adam is told not to do something. A serpent comes and tells Eve that it will be okay, so she tells Adam that it will be okay, and all hell breaks loose. All of a sudden, they have moved from a place of paradise into a place of suffering. Now, of course, the story of Adam and Eve is typically understood or conventionally understood as a way to explain how women suffer in childbirth and how life can sometimes feel very hard. The word Adam, just for your interest, is the Hebrew word for man. The word Eve means life, living. So even as early as that first chapter, second chapter of the first book of the Bible, we have this straying of people into other people's paths. We have this lack of accountability because it's like, no, she made me do it, he made me do it. It is a human thing that we do to stray into other people's paths. In fact, if you think about it, in the Lord's Prayer, we use the terms Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Well, I know that trespasses can mean many things to many people. It could mean that the sins that we have done, the error of thinking that we may have engaged in, the wrongdoing that we may have engaged in. And I like to add the literal term of trespass to that meaning. In the dictionary, trespass has two meanings: to enter a person's land or property without their permission, and to commit an offense against. To me, they can be combined. When we stray into someone else's business, we trespass. We commit an offense against someone when we enter their business. And so, the reason this is an important concept comes back to this picture of Adam and Eve. When we find ourselves in a place of trespassing, when we find ourselves in a place where we are not taking our own responsibility for ourselves, we move from a place of peace to a place of suffering. And as the ancient story reminds us, it is a normal and human thing to do. We will stray into other people's lanes, and they will stray into ours. If we care about our relationships, to enrich our relationships, we want to recognize and then respond to those rumble strips, to the rumblings that happen, that wake us up when we recognize that we are in somebody else's lane, or when they have come into ours. In her book, Loving What Is, author Byron Katie says, and I quote, "I can find only three kinds of business in the universe: mine, yours, and God's." She goes on to say, "For me, the word God means reality. Reality is God because reality rules. Anything that's out of my control, your control, or anyone else's control, I call that God's business." Whenever we're experiencing anxiety, then, one of the first things we can ask is, whose business am I in? Am I in mine? Am I in yours? Or am I in God's business? Let's take a look at what happens when other people stray into our lane. How do we recognize and respond to that rumbling that we experience? I'm sure we have all experienced the benefit of somebody's constructive criticism. And I say that with a smile because it is such a horrible oxymoron to me. And yet, we've all done it. How do we recognize when someone has come into our lane? Well, we often hear what I think of as the should, shouldn't shuffle. You should do this. You might want to try and do this. You shouldn't do this. You should do this instead, and so on. Have you ever been moving about your day really peacefully, enjoying the sunshine, enjoying your space, enjoying whatever you might be doing, and somebody comes along and says or does something that cuts you to the quick, that takes you out of your Eden place and into that place of barren desert, hopelessness, helplessness. That's the rumble strip. When it happens, it can be difficult not to take that personally. Normally, it's directed and with the word you in front of it, so it appears to be personal. And often when that happens, our first reaction then is to become defensive, or we become resistant, or we become angry, or we take offense, and we suffer. And that day that we were enjoying and that relationship that might have been rich up until that point suffers. What we want to try and do is recognize that someone has strayed into our lane, and it's none of our business. We need to put the blinders on and continue on our path as if we hadn't heard whatever they may be espousing. I didn't say it was easy, but it is a goal that is worthy of our attention. What if we can observe the other person's pain and discomfort and anger and irritation without absorbing it? When we absorb it, now there's two of us upset. So there is a great deal of incentive to try and stay calm at a time when somebody else is lovingly or not so lovingly trying to tell you what to do. When we buy into the story that somebody veers into our lane and tells us, then it becomes our story. And opinions are like belly buttons, you know? Everybody's got one. And we don't need to buy into the story. It is their opinion. And they're welcome to it. And it may have nothing to do with us. In her book, Byron Katie goes on and tells a story about her grandson who was 3 years old at the time. She talks about a Darth Vader piggy bank that her grandson had, even though at 3 he didn't have any clue about the movie Star Wars. And I can relate to this because my son had the exact same toy. And this toy, when you put a coin into it, would breathe the Darth Vader sound, the music would play, the lightsaber would come up, and this Darth Vader voice would say, "Impressive, but you are not a Jedi yet." A direct quote from one of the movies. And her grandson, at 3 years old, wanted to be a Jedi so badly. And every time that Byron Katie spoke to him on the phone, she would ask if he was a Jedi yet. And of course, the message on the toy never changed. And he would say, "Grandma, I not. Grandma, I not." She picks up the story. Quote, "Shortly after this, I was invited by a friend to fly over the desert in his plane. I told my friend about this Jedi thing and asked if my grandson could come with us. He said, yes, and started smiling over an idea he had. He made arrangements with the ground crew, and as we landed, we heard a voice over the cabin speakers announcing, "Racy, you are a Jedi. You are a Jedi now." Racy rolled his little eyes in disbelief. I asked him if he was a Jedi yet. He wouldn't answer me. When we got home, he ran straight to Darth Vader. He dropped in his coin. The music began with the heavy breathing. The sword rose, and a deep voice said, "Impressive, but you are not a Jedi yet." That seemed to be the way of it. I asked him one more time, and he told me, "Grandma, I not." End quote. How often do we judge ourselves according to the values and the wisdom of others who stray into our lane? When you hear the should, shouldn't shuffle, consider letting the other person have their opinion, knowing that it comes from their understanding of a situation, and it doesn't have to be yours. Their monologue is not a dialogue. Their diatribe is not a dialogue. Try to observe rather than absorb. Will your feelings sometimes be hurt? Absolutely. Absolutely. And when it gets to be to the point where you feel that inner need to say something, it is okay to do both of these things at once, to observe, not absorb, and let the person know that your feelings have been hurt. And I turn to my friend Martha Creek, who is so wise and has such wonderful words when it comes to dealing with what can otherwise feel like a very difficult conversation to have with somebody. You may say things like, "It's absolutely clear to me that you didn't intend to hurt me. I'm working on that, and I'm going to let you know that I have feelings, and those feelings were hurt. I would want you to let me know if I hurt you." Another one. This is kind of awkward, but I get really uncomfortable when happens. And when I'm uncomfortable, I don't think clearly, I'm not on my path, and I'm likely to become more defensive. Here's another. I'll listen to what you say, but I have a limit to how much I can listen to it. I can be here to help you burn it off, but I don't have a lot of bandwidth for that. And another. For my own peace of mind, I need to stop talking about this. You see how powerful it can be to stay in your own lane and acknowledge that the other person has veered in, but we don't have to absorb it. We can observe it. We're not making them wrong. There's no judgment. There's no blame. There's no shame. There's just staying focused on what's true for you. And remember that when we respond to somebody else's frustration with our own frustration, including the frustration of, "Oh my gosh, you don't need to be so frustrated about this." I do that all the time. The reason I'm sharing this with you is because I need to learn it. And I know that I'm not the only one who would find value in this message. When we respond with frustration at somebody else's frustration, we are just adding more frustration to the whole picture. And so if we say that our path is to add more peace and contentment, then let us be wary of responding to their frustration with our own frustration at their frustration, and enter any word in there. Their sorrow, their anger, their irritability, their attention to detail, whatever it might be. So, that's what happens when somebody comes into business that is ours. What happens when we stray into business that is theirs? When we're focused outward in a very well-meaning way on what our spouse, our child, our mom, our dad, our brothers, our sisters, our friends, our bosses, our government, our healthcare professionals, whatever it might be. When we start the should, shouldn't shuffle, speaking about other people, we are straying into their lane. Those rumble strips should be going off like crazy, because we are not honoring every person's right to choose their own path. And what we're doing then is saying, I know more than you. The corollary to that is, you don't know enough. How do you feel when somebody says that to you? It's not fun. It's not good. It makes you feel sad, disempowered. We're all equal, doing the very best that we can. In the Gospel of John, we're told a story about Jesus who goes to the pools of Bethesda. The pools of Bethesda had several porticos where people who were lame or sick or paralyzed would hang out. And in the pool, it was said that periodically the waters would move, and the first person who could drop themselves into the pool would be healed. So Jesus comes along and he notices a man who's been lying there for 38 years. 38 years. Now, when you're walking along and you see someone who's been lying there, first reaction is to go and help them. Rumble strip. We should go help them. They should go and do something. What does Jesus do? He goes to the man and he says, do you want to be made well? And it is only after the man says yes that Jesus heals him. Take up your mat and walk. You see, we don't know what that person is going through, is experiencing. We don't know their story, and we have no right then to do the should, shouldn't shuffle. It is our rumble strip that we don't want to cross. Not only that, but when we are so focused on all the things that we could be doing for other people, we aren't living our lives, we're living theirs. There's no reward in the relationship with ourselves when we do that. So here when we say things like, he should lighten up, they shouldn't worship that way, you should go back to school, she shouldn't speak to her child like that. Let us notice that we are straying from our lane. And when we stray from our lane, it leads to disappointment. It leads to feelings of anxiety, of suffering, as our expectations are not met. And so, remember, let others live their lives. Live your life instead. And what about God's lane? It's really an extension of the should, shouldn't shuffle about other people. When we start putting all of our energy and concern and worry into judgments about things that are completely out of our control, then that just leads to upset as well, doesn't it? In Loving What Is, on the very first page, Byron Katie says this, and it is perhaps one of the most powerful sentences I've ever read. The only time we suffer is when we believe a thought that argues with what is. The only time we suffer is when we believe a thought that argues with what is. I'll give you an example. It's raining. That's what it is. When we start believing our thoughts about what the rain means, it's miserable, it's cold, it's a bad omen, oh my goodness, I can't go for a walk, my day is ruined. When we start believing the thoughts about the meaning, that is when the suffering starts. Again, we can dance that should, shouldn't shuffle. If we could stay with the realization that it's raining, rather than go to war with the reality of it, wouldn't our lives be that much more calm? What if we didn't believe the stories that we make up about what a situation means? Right now, in this time of pandemic, we are making all kinds of stories up. It's not ours to do. What we can do is focus on what's in front of us, doing what's in our power. And by doing so, we create peace and contentment. We free ourselves from worry about things that we have no control over anyway. It's like being stuck in traffic and fretting. Why fret? You're stuck in traffic. What good is the fretting going to do? It's just a thought. What if you just allow yourself to be stuck in traffic? And you can insert any one of thousands of different examples in that space that I just mentioned. Notice I'm not saying that you have to like it. I'm not saying that you have to love it. I'm not saying that you have to agree with it, condone it. Instead, just don't fight it. It's like, what if they gave a war and nobody came? I'm reminded of the beloved and powerful serenity prayer that is said so often by so many people every single day. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. The rumble strips in our life are the thoughts and the things that interfere with our clear road, with our clear path. They're the things that disturb our clear mind. We want to be aware of the shoulds and shouldn'ts. We want to be aware of when people come into our path and recognize by observing but not absorbing what might be going on for them. We want to recognize the stories that we tell ourselves when we try to help other people and veer across the shouldn't rumble strip into their path. Let's honor them and their own intelligence and divinity and wisdom. And when it's God's, when it's bigger than any of us can influence, then let us be accepting of that too. And just try and remind ourselves about who we want to be in the midst of this. And so, the rumble strip. Pay attention to it. Become aware of it. And for rich relationships, respond to the rumble strip. I bless you.